Sure. So it's a good question. What experience has prepared us for this? Well, I think in many ways, I know this sounds super cheesy, but God doesn't call the qualified; He qualifies the called. So in many ways, I feel unprepared, but obviously we do have some experience. And so Jess and I have been in ministry for 16 years now, full-time ministry. Jess grew up as a pastor's kid, and so I did not grow up in the church really, and so you'll hear more about that. But We've been involved in just about every aspect of ministry. When we started out, I was the video guy, mainly because I had a Mac computer back in 2007. That was like the big qualification for the media department back then. I've led the small group ministry. We call it the group life ministry, youth, young adults. My wife led the youth for years. We've both been on the preaching team for many, many years. And so we've kind of done a whole bunch of different things in church world. I even led the women's ministry for a season. That was wild. Pink shirt Wednesdays. And then in the midst of that, obviously 2012, we were set aside to launch our Riverside campus, which was our third campus at the time. And so myself and Jess and a small team, we took about 100 people from our Umhlanga campus to our Riverside campus. And we just watched God do incredible things over that 7 or 8 years that we were leading at Riverside. It went from 100 people to 1,000 people, and we just saw baptisms and new people coming to faith and life and community. And that was really exciting. Somewhere in the middle of that, we also did our master's degree together, in a master's in theology, which was really tough. Looking back, I think planting a church, having 2 children, studying your master's, moving in with your in-laws. That was a tough season, but we loved it. And Jess and I are both studiers. We love to learn, we love to read. And so our master's degree really just kind of expanded our horizons and our view on how big God is. And then obviously for the past 5 years or so, leading as the co-senior pastor at Grace. So Grace is a multi-campus church. We have 4 different physical locations and an online campus. We have 11 services every Sunday, all live preaching, and so that's pretty wild. But having kind of been leading that, so that's kind of our experience at Grace. We have about 4,000 or 5,000 people attending on a Sunday between our campuses. And I hate to talk about numbers because it's not about numbers. It's every single one of those numbers is a person with a family and with struggles and with challenges, with doubts and questions and a spiritual journey. And so it's been a privilege and a grace to be a part of what God is doing in and through Grace Family Church. And again, I'm just trusting and praying that something of that has prepared us in some way, or at least prepared our hearts for this next season at E-Hills. And so that's sort of some of our journey through ministry. Sure. So where were we when we were called to ministry? That was back in 2006, somewhere around there. And actually crazy, we were actually in Colorado. So it feels like kind of full circle because so I was a physical therapist by training, and we were living, Jess and I had just been married, and we were living in London in the UK for 2 years. And then we basically decided we can either go home and settle in Durban and use our pounds to put a deposit on a house, or we can just blow all our pounds and go traveling. And so we decided the second option. And we literally spent our pounds traveling around the world. We visited so many different countries: South America, Southeast Asia, the US, Canada. We rented an RV and drove across America and across Canada, and we got to visit churches. And when we felt the sense of call to ministry, we were working in Aspen, in Colorado, as like ski bums, like in the kids' ski school, and then eventually on the mountain. And we actually had approached the senior pastor of Grace before we went traveling and said that we really felt this call to ministry and that we wanted to go into full-time ministry. And he actually said no. Go and travel, see the world, visit other churches, be a volunteer, see what God has done. And if it is a true calling, then it won't go away. And to be honest, that was like the best advice I think we got as young married couples. I was like 23, Jess was 22, and we did that. We traveled. But all throughout that traveling, the call, the sense of call just got stronger and stronger and stronger. Someone once said to us, it's like a calling is almost like pregnancy. Eventually, the contractions come and it just gets closer and closer, and eventually it's like this baby is coming. And so we actually eventually phoned Mark from the States and said, listen, we're coming back to work at Grace, whether you pay us or not. We just know this is where God has called us. And so, so then we flew from Colorado back to South Africa. That was like middle of 2007. And we've been on staff ever since. But I look back on those years of traveling and visiting other churches and volunteering, and I'm so grateful for those years, because they really were a gift for our marriage and for ministry, for the sense of call, because ministry is tough, and being able to look back and see that season we had, and then to know with conviction that this was a call from God, not just some, thing that we were going through. So yeah, that's how we ended up at Grace, and that's where we were when we felt called. And now, quite poetic, or that God is calling us back to Colorado again for this next season. Yeah, so I think I shared some of this in a previous video. I'm now getting confused between what I've shared in what video, but if I'm repeating myself, bear with me. But I think, like I said, at the time, when we felt this call to grace and this call to ministry, like for us, it was kind of one and the same thing. And we just, I guess, assumed that we would do our entire ministry season at Grace Family Church, and like I said, this is a great story, retire hopefully without any scandals to your name, or, well done, good and faithful servant. But, God was just stirring something else in us, this something more, this something beyond. And that's kind of what led us to say, okay, well, God, what does that look like? And we didn't really pursue things so much as saying, okay, God, if you are calling us beyond, then you need to make that pretty obvious to us. And I think that He has made that very obvious to us. And honestly, we can honestly say through these ups and downs of the journey, the minute we walked through the doors of Eastern Hills Church, we just knew, not like on, because up until that point, all we'd seen was Eastern Hills through like a YouTube video, and we'd watched all the services. And I actually had met Phil before, and a friend of mine from the Irresistible Church Network had said, hey, there's this guy Phil, and he's going to be leaving, and I think that would be a great fit for you. And I was like, okay, well, that's cool. Let's see what God does. But looking back now, you just see the hand of God on this whole thing. Even the way that Grace Family Church joined the Irresistible Church Network years ago, and we're actually busy in the process of trying to form an Irresistible Church partnership network in South Africa, of which we kind of like heading that charge up. And then to see God calling us now into in that network. And so we had no idea what God was up to at the time, obviously. But now looking back, we realize His hand through all of this. And I think for all of us, that's true. When we look back on our life, we can see how God has actually been orchestrating all these different connections and people and relationships and events along the way to have us where we are now. And going back to our visit to Eastern Hills, we walked in and we had to pretend like we didn't know anyone, because like an incognito visit. We'd already met the search team and the elders, but they were all told to ignore us, So like we walked into the church, and Kelvin had added me on Instagram, and so I saw him and I was like, oh no, and I just walked on. I'm not allowed to do that. And so it was, but we just literally, it was that we were there for that baptism service. And I think you guys baptized like 52 people, which is just crazy. And Jess and I literally like ugly cried our way through every single baptism, because we just knew that we want to be part of what God is doing in and through this church. So I think I've shared some of that around our experience in ministry and the different ministries we've been involved in over the past 16, 17 years. I think, part of that is, I love to preach, I love to teach, I love to lead, and I think those are my strongest gifts. But the thing that also sort of surprised me along the way was how much I just love to also pastor people, and walk with people through, their weddings and their funerals and their joy and their sadness. And we've loved being pastors, Jess and I, and having the privilege of standing with people in their pool of tears and also on their mountaintop. So that's part of our experience. I think also part of our experience at Grace, because we looked at the American church and thought, why do you need us there? Because you can use anyone, but I do think, Grace Family Church initially, if you go back 10 years, was predominantly a white church. We were very homogenous in a country that clearly, where that's not the makeup of our country. And so over the past 10 years, very intentionally, we've worked to change that, to be representative of our community. And we are now that. And that's that some people have left because of that, and we've had difficult conversations because of that. But I do think that some of that experience, I think we can help in terms of where God has E-Hills going. I think in terms of serving the poor and the marginalized, we loved seeing what For Aurora is doing, and partnerships with places like Socks Place, and we just have such a heart. I just have such a heart to our vision statement here at Grace is love God, love people, and make a difference. And so for us, we see Eastern Hills making a real and tangible difference in the lives of so many people in Aurora and beyond. And I want to be part of that. And I think some of what we've experienced here at Grace, where you've got this crazy divide between rich and poor, where you've got rich and poor living close together, where you've got people who historically have been divided and separated, and by class, by race, by all these different things, and what a beautiful opportunity for the church to be a light in a dark place, to be a place where all people, regardless of their political convictions or their background or even their belief, can come together and experience Jesus, experience that Jesus makes life better, because that's true for every single person. And so, that's some of our story. I think also some of our experience in terms of going from one campus to multiple campuses. I was part of all of our campus, in terms of multiplying, and I think that's a complex journey, but something that I'm quite excited about. That's just some of our experience, and again, God can use anyone, and I'm just humbled and grateful that He's chosen to use us and to partner with what He is already busy at work doing in amazing ways at Eastern Hills. And so, we're super excited about it.